first beer that you make is
A pale ale.
pale ale. Is it still available? Is it
Still available.
Is that the paddle wheel or? So the paddle wheel is the first beer you guys make.
Right.
As Bent River.
As Bent River.
Describe that for me. Why do you start there?
When we got the equipment, the people that we bought the equipment from come out, install the equipment, give you some basic recipes to work with, and then you take that and you, knowing what I know from the business, kind of tweak it around. You just don't want to make, a recipe that somebody hand to you.
Right.
You put your stamp on it. So
right.
For our dark beer, we want to have a dark beer. Every craft brewery has a stout or something along those lines. So we came up with our oatmeal stout, which was a sweeter stout, not a dry stout like a Guinness, but more of a sweeter tasting stout. Came up with a introductory beer for people that maybe haven't had craft brewed beers before. So we came up with a very light beer that we called our blonde. So if somebody come in and said, I want something like Miller Lite or Bud Light, that would be as close as we could get to it.
How important is that for the beer to be accessible? Because I think there are people who shy away from craft beers because it's a lot to take in at once. There's a lot of information that you have to get, and it can be intimidating. How important is that to you at Bent River to have it be, to have something that you can say to somebody, if you like sort of the mass-produced beers, this is a way to kind of get in. A gateway beer, if you will.
A gateway beer.
Right?
Business-wise, makes a lot of sense. The truth is, your light beer like our blonde and stuff are more difficult to make for a craft brewery because there's nothing there to hide any type of small mistakes that you might make in the process. A light beer like that is very difficult to make and have it taste clean and good. Uncommon originally came up with our general manager many years ago in Moline. Came up with the concept of adding coffee to the beer.
I remember when Uncommon Stout first came out, that was kind of nuts.
We looked into it. We thought we may have been the first brewery to actually come up with that concept, but I believe we were beaten out by one or two bigger craft breweries out west.
It's first I think any of us ever heard of it, though.
First any of us ever heard of it.
Right.
And we were getting coffee from various places when we were making this coffee beer. And there was a little market in Davenport called the Uncommon Market.
Okay.
If you remember that, it's been closed for quite some time, but it was just a little market that we would go in and they'd sell our beer in bottles there back in the day. And we would get coffee from them and we struck a deal with, we'd use your coffee and call it Uncommon Stout and let people know that that's where the coffee came from.
It's a great name. So even though Uncommon Market doesn't exist anymore, you can still get Uncommon Stout.
Yes.
That's beautiful. So that's a legacy right there.
It's why we're here.
The Uncommon Stout, is this the beer that built all of this place?
This is the beer that built Rock Island.
No kidding. No kidding. It's kind of nuts that 20-some years ago, you're going to Mugs Club, and now here we are at the Rock Island location. There's the Moline location of Bent River. So you have the expansion. How many total different beers has Bent River made in all this time, different lines?
Between 20 and 30.
Between 20 and 30 different beers.
Yeah, some one-offs, some...
Right. You do things that are just kind of seasonal or one-off experiments that you kind of go with. Right. And if it works, you keep bringing it back. You have stuff you do.
To a point, we're getting limited because there's a couple of our products that are in such demand that this facility is getting maxed out.
Okay, Tim, so we are behind the scenes here with an exclusive look at how things happen. Tell me about this beautiful, giant thing.
This is the brew kettle. This is where the actual boil takes place, where hops are added.
Okay.
It's the last in a line of these other kettles down here. The process really starts down at this end with a mill. The grain comes out of the silo into a mill, goes into a mash tun, goes into a lauter tun, and this is the last step where the boiling takes place, the cooking, the hot side we're on. And from this vessel here, the hops are added. They add the aroma and the spice to the beer. A little bit of preservative qualities come from the hops.
How hot is it in there? We're in the hot side.
We're boiling.
Boiling.
Right. This kettle is boiling. These other kettles processes at lower temperatures for the mash and stuff. But this gets up to a rolling boil.
Which means?
Which is fitting out of the top, which means the action to get the bitterness out of the hops is heat and movement. So you got to have that heat going on to break down the lupin glands to get that bitterness out, and you also have them rolling around and moving.
Once you've got it boiled where you want, what's the next step here?
Next step is we want to get from the hot side to the cold side, and to get from a boiling temperature down to a fermentation temperature, generally speaking 68 degrees or so for an ale, we have to go through a heat exchanger,
Okay.
which is basically like a big radiator. It has glycol and cold water, or a mixture of those two, going in one direction against all these plates in there, and the hot wort starting at the top going to the other direction. By the time it goes in at boiling, comes out at about 68 degrees.
Wow.
And you control that temperature by the amount of glycol or liquid going in the opposite direction. This time of year when the water's cold,
Right.
it doesn't take that much glycol. In the summertime, the water's
more.
warmer and we use more glycol. But
And then the green tank is oxygen? You put oxygen in there?
pure oxygen is what gives the wort, or gives the yeast that you're going to put in this wort, the start to respirate that yeast and get it ready to reproduce itself and ferment all that beer out.
And your yeast really enjoys the pure
It
oxygen.
loves the pure oxygen.
Yeah. Okay, so Tim, we went from the hot side to now the cool side, the cold side.
Cold.
Cold.
We're talking cold sometimes.
Frigid, even. It's interesting to see a hashtag being used in the real world. Tell me about these fermenters.
These fermenters are where we go from basically the hot side, which is the dead sterile cooking aspect of this process, to the living side. This is where we add the yeast. Yeast is a living being. We add the yeast and keep it at certain temperatures for periods of time, which allow the yeast to convert all those sugars that we produce in the hot side into fermentable, or all the sugars, bring them over here, use them as food, and produce CO2 and alcohol.
And that's going on right now as we speak behind us.
That's going on right now in most of these vessels that we're looking at right here, right?
Okay. We've been hot, we've been cold, and now we get conditioned.
We get conditioned. We're basically at the end of the line before we want to bottle or keg anything. In these tanks, we basically keep the beer at a certain temperature so that we can force carbonate it. We add CO2 gas under a certain pressure and
This is where the magic bubbles come in.
where the bubbles come in.
Yeah.
This is also where we will add certain things if we're making like a pepper beer or something like that. We'll actually cold infuse things in these vessels.
So you're conditioning it not only with bubbles and fermentation, but you're also adding flavors
Magic.
if needed. And magic. Magic is
Magic
used.
happens here.
I've seen it with my own eyes, people. Coming up on Brewed, uncommon uses for that uncommon stout. Join us inside the kitchen at Barley and Rye, where the chef is cooking up dishes that'll blow your taste buds away.